All right. Thank you for taking the time to introduce yourself. We've got a group of people in Melbourne, which is great. Someone else from lovely Christchurch. All right, let's get this show on the road, folks. So let me just begin by saying welcome. My name is Andy Fryer, and I'll introduce my colleague Didier in a moment as well. But today's session is all about how to choose a volunteer management software system with confidence. So even though we are from Better Impact and we provide this session, this is not a tell-all about the product that we have. This is really just to assist people who may be looking for volunteer management solutions to have a think about what is a good starting point for that journey. Because it's a big decision to make, and we, as much as anybody, like to ensure that we're providing good information to help people to make the right decision based on the needs of their organisation. We will be recording the session. We've already hit the record button, and everybody will get a copy of this, so you'll be able to share this with your colleagues. I'll just ask that everyone, if you're not already on mute, to pop yourself on mute. We will take questions and answers at the end of the session. But if you have some immediate questions that pop up through the course of the day, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Didier, who is my colleague from Victoria, he is looking after all of our Australian and New Zealand sales and support inquiries. So he's kind of the go-to person for people that have initial kind of inquiries about our software. So he'll be fielding those questions in the chat and letting me know what's coming there. A little bit about myself. I've been with Better Impact now for about 15 years. I work as the National Operations Manager across Australia, New Zealand, and the Asia Pacific. Prior to that, I was been doing a lot of international training and consulting work through a company that I had called Better Impact. But most importantly, I've worked directly in volunteer leadership for more than 30 years. Working in healthcare and disability services and a few other areas as well. And the reason I think that is so important is because partway through that journey, I also had the conversation with myself and my team about, hey, spreadsheets aren't necessarily cutting it for us. We need to look for some kind of electronic database solution. Back then, the field was pretty limited, but embarked on the kind of journey that we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I've walked the walk and understand some of the dilemmas that people may have. So let's get started. And we've already done some introductions in the chat, but I want to get you to continue to use that chat to answer a couple of questions for me. Just so that we can get to understand who is in the room in a little more detail. So the first question that we wanted to ask everybody is, have you ever used a VMS or a volunteer management solution before? And the three responses to that are type in number 1, number 2, and number 3, representing yes, I have, no, I haven't, and 3, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Andy. Or you can just type yes and no. That's fine as well. So we've got a few people that definitely have used VMS systems, a number of people that have never used one, but most people are sure that they have or they haven't, which is good. So we've got a good mix of people. And indeed, I can see in the list of people that are attending today that there are actually a few existing clients that have popped along to have a look as well. All right, so next question. What tool are you using the most to currently manage your volunteer program? So again, 1 represents spreadsheets, 2, you're using a current volunteer management system, or 3 is other. And if you write 3, just maybe pop a little message in there to let us know what that is. So again, we've got some 2s, we've got some 1s. Yeah, 1, 1, 1. We often jokingly say that Excel is our biggest competitor in this space. And you will be surprised as to how often when we're talking to people that are embarking on this journey, that they don't have a single spreadsheet, they actually have multiple spreadsheets. And in fact, I was talking to someone just the other day, and they're trying to pull in their database from having 14 separate spreadsheets into one single volunteer management solution. Nola's using a calendar. Great, thanks, Nola. So again, quite a wide range of options. I guess one of the kind of starting point for this discussion, which we're going to have today, is that whatever we are using, unless it's succinct and it does exactly what we need it to do, what we often find is it can leave us feeling a little bit like the person in this slide here, a little bit overwhelmed, fatigued. One of the things I've talked about a lot over the years when I've been training volunteer leaders is that, you know, for many of us, we embark on volunteer engagement in a way where it feels very manageable. Hey, we've got this great little program, we've got 30 volunteers, let's get you involved, and we jump on board and we set up a spreadsheet, and it's really easy to manage with, you know, 30 people. And then we do our job really, really well. And the result of that, of course, is that our volunteer numbers grow, and 30 becomes 60, that becomes 90, but becomes 150. And suddenly that easy to manage spreadsheet with 30 people is out of control with 150. And we find we're spending more and more time, you know, grinding data and playing around on our computer rather than actually supporting our volunteer teams in really productive and effective ways. So you know, I kind of always say that what we really do is we become victims of our own success more often than not. The really common, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. I'll jump back in here. I'll leave entering new people to you, Didier, otherwise I'm just going to scroll the slides forward. So we, Didier and I, often hear when we get approached by people that are looking at their volunteer management system options, we talk to them a little bit about, you know, what seems to be the issue, and we hear the issue. And the really common things we hear is that people are just doing too much data entry these days, and there's a lot of duplication of data because of the way it's being conducted. That reporting that we need to do to the board or the CEO or to funders just takes so much time that it just feels counterproductive. That ultimately there's often a lot of errors in data integrity, you know, that something's updated over here but not over here, and that, you know, we can't trust the data that we're capturing necessarily about our team. As I mentioned, often that we're just spending so much time doing this kind of busy work that we don't get to engage with our volunteers in the way that we would ultimately like. That ultimately can lead to volunteer fallout and people feeling disillusioned with their volunteering role because they don't feel supported enough. And all we're doing is chasing our tails in the office, trying to keep on top of everything. So all of those things are really important. One of the really, really big ticket items, though, these days, and we'll talk a bit more about this, is data security. And what we're finding more and more, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, is that has become a real driver for people to move away from simple spreadsheets and really start to engage with volunteer management systems in a lot more detail. Now, having said all of that, I just wanted to share with you this slide. There we go. That this came out of a state of software happiness report a few years ago. And out of that report, what we saw was that more than half of all employees are actually unhappy at work, not because of the job that they're doing, but simply because of the software tools that they are needing and having to use. And so it's really important to understand or to think about and consider whether the tools that we are using is one of the driving forces for us to start to consider some different things. Something that good software should do is it should become a one-stop shop. What it should enable you to do is to pull all of your volunteer management needs into one place and allow you to be able to deal with that information quickly and effectively, and to be able to quickly and effectively and access reporting and some of those things that often takes a lot of times. So what we see here are two lists. VEPs means volunteer engagement professionals, or volunteer managers or volunteer coordinators, whatever you want to call them. And this is kind of the key roles or the key functions that many of us have when we're dealing with our volunteer teams. We are responsible for that recruiting piece, and then screening new people and training and getting them on board. We're responsible for doing the scheduling or the rostering and sending out regular emails and recording hours and reporting on hours and reporting on other outcomes that volunteers might have achieved for us. In addition to things like recording and tracking data, recognition, reward, and so much more. So we have this kind of base role that we are responsible for undertaking in order to engage volunteers for our organisation. From the volunteer side of things, we need volunteers to be able to apply into our program. We need them to be able to receive and send communication. So we need communication to be two-way. We need them to be able to ideally see where we have a need and sign up and fill those needs, manage their own schedules and their own rosters, keep their own data up to date on their behalf, log hours, report on their contributions, and a whole lot more as well. So what these kind of all-in-one volunteer management software solutions now do is enable you to have all of those tools in one place. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start to think through, what does that look like for you? What is it that you would be wanting an all-in-one solution to be able to achieve? As I said, the good news is that modern day solutions do allow and offer all of that stuff. So the benefits, to get you feeling a little more like the lady in the photo here, the benefits are that ultimately you get a better use of your time. And that includes your volunteer time. And this is where I'm really, really big on these kind of systems, so that at the end of the day, what we want is not just a bit of software that does work for us. We want to improve the value of our volunteer program. We want to improve the way that our volunteers feel included and feel supported in the work that they are doing, because ultimately better supported volunteers provide better outcomes for our organizations, which leads to us being able to better meet the missions of our organizations as well. Reporting becomes better and quicker. Again, I was talking, and I'm sure she won't mind me name dropping, but I was working with the volunteer manager at Australia Zoo yesterday, and she was saying that when she came on board, they had 3 or 4 different spreadsheets that were being used, and pulling reports was just about impossible. And she said the very first thing I needed to do when I got on board was get a VMS. And she said, now I can generate my reports literally by clicking a button, because I've built them all in. I know what I need to capture, and that stuff is now readily available. I'm not spending hours and hours sorting that stuff out. Better communications. And again, I mentioned a minute ago that communication should be two-way. It's great for us to send information out, but be able to get information back from our volunteers and have them be active in their volunteer engagement rather than passive is a real change that we continue to see in volunteer engagement broadly. Once upon a time it was, I'm the volunteer manager, you're the volunteers, I will dole out all the information to you and you'll kind of absorb it. Whereas these days it is much more of a two-way focus, and volunteers are expecting that they will be able to be active and actively engaged in their volunteering. That leads to better stakeholder engagement, ultimately better data security and confidentiality. So how do we mitigate risk? How do we stop, or how do we ensure that volunteers feel satisfied with the data that we are capturing about them? And again, volunteers are often the drivers these days of this kind of questioning and information. They want to know that the data that we are storing about them is safe, and there is no safety really when your data's sitting on a spreadsheet somewhere. Even if it has some kind of password, there is still no great security with that whatsoever. Better data integrity. So, you know, a field of information can be updated in one place and then you can be assured that it's being updated everywhere else. Again, better value because you're consolidating your systems. And what we mean by that is that in addition to often people having lots of spreadsheets, the other common thing that we come across is that organizations have multiple systems to do the one job. So they have a system to do recruitment. They do another system to do scheduling. They have another system for their learning management system. They have another system to record hours. They have another system to send their newsletter, another one for email. And so having to learn 5 or 6 different things to achieve what can be achieved in one is often also a big drain on our time and our resources. Better visibility, better access to data, and ultimately better volunteer and staff morale and retention. So there are a lot of upsides to engaging with the volunteer management system. So all of this is leading us to get you to start to think about what your current state of play might be and where you ultimately want to land in terms of the volunteer program that you're running. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but you know, often moving from our current state, moving on to our desired state is a challenge because you know the person that leads volunteers sometimes feels a little powerless, or maybe they're not in direct contact with some people in the organization that can make key decisions about technology, and we think of maybe the IT team and people like that as well. So thinking about where we want to get to is a really important starting point. And while these modern day systems can do 1,001 different things, it's always good to set some really realistic goals. These are the most important things that we want to develop and we want to move towards, and we can start to state those things and move forward with them. That's just a quote there from Albert Einstein. We can't solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. But one of the things that I would say around this is that we also can't solve our problems with the same level of response that we've always had. And so often the most difficult thing to embark on this journey is actually to find the time to break out of that cycle of busy work that we're doing using multiple systems or you know embedding ourselves into spreadsheets. It's actually to break out of that, to give ourselves the thinking time to say, okay, I'm making a very deliberate choice to start to think positively and act proactively about engaging with the volunteer management system. So what's preventing change in your organization? This is a good place to start. So first of all, and again, these are really common things that Didier and I both hear. People will come along and say, well, we can't afford good software. My response usually is, and can you afford not to have good software, particularly around that security and privacy issue these days? We already use so many other tools, we don't feel like we need another one. And I understand that. And often the resistance there is that people have actually mastered those other 6 programs, and to then have to master something new again becomes a little daunting based on the fact that they are already so busy in the work that they do. Using software will take away from the personal touch, and I can guarantee you that that's actually not the case at all. As I mentioned, what we are finding more and more is that volunteers are the ones that are driving the need for change. Volunteers are the ones that are expecting that they will have a username and a password, and they'll be able to log in and log their hours or see what vacancies you might have or understand what is going on or undertake some e-learning. Spreadsheets are free and they don't cost us anything. And again, I understand that. I've worked with the not-for-profit sector for decades, and I understand that many organizations run on the smell of an oily rag. But again, there are bigger costs at play. Costs like having, you know, your organization's name across the front of the newspaper when there's a data breach or something like that. my volunteers can't use technology. This is my big bugbear. And this particular excuse, I think, actually is driven more by volunteer managers than it is by volunteers. And we only need to think back over the last 3 years when every single volunteer somehow managed to learn how to scan a QR code during COVID when they wanted to go to the local cafe. Volunteers had to get apps on their phone and they had to start doing things. So this notion of the fact that volunteers can't use technology is a pretty dead in the water one now. I totally understand that there will always be a minority of volunteers who are not technologically sound, but the challenge that I would throw out for those of you who may be thinking about that is, when engaging with something like a modern day volunteer management system, let's not let the squeaky wheel run the machine. Let's find ways that we can deal with that small number of people that might struggle with technology, but give the benefit to the bulk number of volunteers that are itching to get in and use this stuff. And that's often what we find, is that, there might be 3 or 5% of people that can't use it, 95% can, and then decisions are being made based on the 5% and not the 95%. And then finally, it's too much work to make the change. And I think I touched on that already. But again, it's about having a plan, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the question that we have then is, are we part of the solution, or are we part of the problem? And it is a vicious circle. It is that circle of, we are busy because we don't have good tools. We can see the need for a good tool, but we're too busy to actually implement the new tool. So at some point, we have to jump out of that cycle of busy work, and we need to give ourselves the time and the space to start to think about what the future looks like. So setting goals, identifying problems, they're all really important starting points. So a few practical things to get you to think about as you may embark upon this journey. So to begin with, let's start to think about, what are the main problems that you and your organization are encountering? Now, if you have a pen handy, it's good to jot some of these things down. I'm not sure whether you were emailed these documents yet, or whether they come after we've finished the seminar today. But coming up with a problem statement is a really, really great starting point. What are the key problems that you have identified for your organization? And quite frankly, this is going to be slightly different for every single organization. And I'm going to be completely upfront and say, not every volunteer management solution is perfect for every single volunteer organization. And in fact, Didier and I, in conversations with people that are exploring this, if they come to us with their problems and say, these are the deal breakers, these are the things that are really affecting us that we have to solve. If our software can't do that, we are completely upfront and say, we are not the solution for you. You need to go and explore some other solutions. But having a really good understanding of what your key issues are before you even get started is really important. So what is the problem? Who or what departments does that problem affect, and in what way? What are the consequences if that problem doesn't get resolved? And start to kind of think about that as the starting point. One of the things that I would encourage those of you, and again, I just want to be transparent here, one of the issues that I see a lot is that volunteer engagement professionals, volunteer leaders, they see and they know that a volunteer management solution is what they need. The biggest problem for them often is, how do I convince other people in my organization that this is what I need? And so let me begin by saying that Didier and I are happy to work with you to make the case, because often that is exactly what we need to do. We need to give you the tools that you can then go and sell to the other people in your organization that might need convincing about this. too many people in organizations see the whole volunteering department as being a pretty easy fix. The nice people give their time for free. They don't understand the complexities that come with running a volunteer program. So when you think about the problem statement, let me encourage you to think about that, not only from the point of view of your volunteer program, but from the point of view of your organization. And a really good strategy is to start to think about and frame things in terms of data security and privacy, because that is a big ticket item that affects everybody from you and your team in the volunteer department right up to the chair of the board and the CEO. And so it's one of those things that is very difficult to ignore. But some of those other things I've talked about as well: duplication, lack of time, maybe turnover of volunteer numbers, all of those things. But certainly data integrity and data security, if you don't already do that well, is definitely something that can get people's attention. Out of identifying your problems and creating some problem statements, think about what the goal is for you. And so there's an example here: to select a volunteer management system that our team is confident will solve our challenges and elevate our program. It can be whatever you want, but set yourself a goal. And it may even mean that you have to set several goals. And maybe the first goal is, I need to find an ally in my organization to support me with this journey. Or I need to at least get a voice around the table so that the issues that I'm raising can be heard. And then you can set more goals that move forward from there. Associated with all of that, and this is a really important one based on the stuff that I'm talking about here, it's this notion or this thought that you shouldn't be doing this alone. So let's assume that you get a voice around the table and you get some traction. People are hearing that you have a need, and you kind of get the green light to say, yep, it would be good for us to go off and explore volunteer management solutions and see what's out there and see what it's going to cost and see what it can do to improve our volunteer programs and the work of our volunteers. So having a dedicated team that can work with you to look at this is really important. We find that the best solutions come out of organizations where there are different experiences around the table. Now, this is a sample of the kind of group that you might want to pull together. And it may or may not include all of these, but certainly the people in this one that we find are commonly engaged. Obviously, the volunteer manager, although you would be surprised how often in the past I've come across large organizations where they have a project manager that sets up the entire database without consulting the volunteer manager, and then kind of say to the volunteer manager, we've done all the hard work for you, here's your database, and it turns out to be not what they needed at all. So you need to drive the process. So ideally, volunteer manager, somebody from an IT team that is supportive of what you're trying to do is a really important point of contact, simply because they are going to have some different questions than you. They're going to want to know, how is data encrypted, and they're going to want to know about ISO certification standards, and they're going to want to know all this stuff that as a volunteer leader you don't need to know about. But what you need to be able to do is look your volunteers in the eye and say, I've gone to our IT team, they've tested this solution to the nth degree, and I can guarantee you your data is safe and secure. Ideally, somebody like a project manager, somebody that understands setting goals and hitting goals and all of that, can be really helpful if you're in an organization that allows for that. And the engagement of volunteers, those four particularly are really important. Board of directors, executive directors, they can be helpful, but more often than not, they are going to be more of a rubber stamp to say, go off and explore this. When it comes to volunteers, let me also encourage you not to only think about engaging your volunteers as kind of, end testers of the solution, because often we have volunteers who are highly skilled and have the skills that are required to perhaps even take on that project manager kind of role. And often we will work with both the volunteer manager and a small team of highly skilled, dedicated volunteers to implement a new solution. So think about who you might be able to pull together, both to sell the idea, but then to actually implement the exploration of the various volunteer management solutions in the marketplace as well. Again, just a bit of a worksheet here. You can start to be thinking about who you might think of in your organization that might be good to get on board with this kind of project. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that today, but it's certainly something to consider. And the other thing, just to go back again, often to make the case in the first instance might mean finding an ally a little higher up in the organization who has the ear of the CEO or a board member or somebody like that who can be your ally in order to get you to this point. So sometimes it's developing that support team in order to get you to this project point as well. All right, so once you've kind of just determined that, you've got your team together, you're ready to start to explore the marketplace. Undertaking a needs assessment is really important. So understanding what it is that you need is critical. And again, thinking through what are the needs that are kind of, absolute must-haves, what, deal breakers, essentially. We always like to start talking to potential new clients who are exploring our software. What are your deal breakers? Well, it must do this, 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 and this. And we'll say, fantastic, we can do all 4 of those things. Or, hey, we can only do 3 of those four things. If that 4th thing is an absolute deal breaker, maybe you need to go look elsewhere. It saves us time. I can talk honestly as a vendor in the sector, but it saves you time too, that you don't then get 3 months down the track and then suddenly find out that something that you absolutely categorically need isn't provided by that vendor. So understand your tech partners. There are a whole bunch of different questions that you can ask in terms of determining who might be suitable in the sector. Again, I've been with Better Impact now for 15 years. Our company's been around for about 22. We were very much some of the very first in the marketplace. And back then, there were very few around, a few other vendors around the place. These days, there are dozens and dozens of potential vendors out there. And so the marketplace is a lot more crowded. And there are some really critical questions that you need to ask. So some of those questions, I think some of the really key things are around the credibility of the vendor. How long have they been in business? Sadly, we deal often with organizations where a volunteer has pulled together a little database and they've used that for the last 5 years and it's worked perfectly fine, and then the volunteer leaves and they have no support and the whole thing crashing into a screaming heap. I used to go across and do the Points of Light conference in America most year, and we would exhibit there, and there would be maybe 20 exhibitors in the volunteer management space, and I'd go back the following year and there would be the 3 big players would still be there and the other 17 would be gone, and there'd be another 17 in their place. So what kind of history do some of these companies have, and are they likely to be around for the long term? Because if you are struggling with time to set something up and find a partner and get all this sorted out and learn it and set it up and engage your volunteers with it, and then the company falls over after 12 months, then that's completely counterproductive and leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Technology, security, privacy, safety, #1 ticket item. You get what you pay for, and so while the cost of any solution is a consideration, you do absolutely need to weigh that up with the security and the technology brief. So the kind of questions that, and again, having a project team with an IT person will ask is, what are the certifications? What are the data integrity things that you have in place? We're more than happy with Better Impact. We are ISO 27001 certified. So we have the highest level of certification for the security and safety of this kind of private information anywhere in the world. But not every organization does. How is data encrypted? Is it encrypted only when it's zipping around the internet, or is it encrypted when it's actually sitting on your service as well? So there's these kind of questions that are really important to explore. And as I mentioned before, often they're way above the head of those of us that are leading and supporting volunteers, which is why we need to engage people that understand those answers. What kind of support are you going to get with the vendor that you're looking at? And that's a really critical one, because it's all well and good for Didier and I to come along. We send you an invoice, you pay us some money, and then we disappear and you never see us again. That's not very helpful to you at all. We pride ourselves at Better Impact on our support and our help. We have 24-hour a day, 5-day-a-week chat. We have comprehensive help libraries and video libraries and all the rest of it. I know some other organizations are nowhere near as responsive of that. Again, where is the company located? Do they have local support? For those of us in Australia and New Zealand, if it happens to be somebody based in North America that only has North American support that you can only access during the North American day, not so helpful for us here in this part of the world. So again, really important, how quick is the response? And how thorough is that response? Is that response part of your annual fee, or do you have to pay extra for it? So there's all these kind of questions that it's worth really digging in and exploring. How easy is the system to use is another key question, both for yourself as an administrator, but also for your volunteers. Does it have an app? What can volunteers do using that app? Can they keep their details up to date? Can they fill vacancies? Can they log hours? What are the intricacies of all of that kind of stuff? And probably the other couple, one would be just going back to budget, understanding how any fee that you may need to pay works. So some companies in this space, they will charge you by administrator. So if you have a relatively large organization, let's say you're a council, and you have 10 people that are administrators in your system, you pay for all 10 people. Other companies like ours, you have unlimited number of administrators, you just pay an annual fee. So exploring how the billing works and what that looks like is important. And the other really important thing that people don't often think about, and this goes way back to what I said at the beginning of the presentation, is we often become victims of our own success. We do our jobs really well, we recruit more volunteers, our programs grow. How does any volunteer management solution that you're looking at allow you to have scalability? So as a system grows, as your program grows, can the system grow to match that? And how easy is that to happen? So these are bigger questions beyond simply, I want to be able to send an email or I want to be able to recruit a volunteer via an application form. These are the bigger picture questions that mean that the solution you find is going to last you for the long term. So again, if you haven't already got this document, we will be sending it to you after today so that you can actually play with this. So again, just some key questions there on the left-hand side that kind of relate a little bit to what I've just been talking about. And then there's 5 columns there, V1 to V5 for vendor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can make some comparative notes and understand where each of the vendors that you might be looking at hit the mark or miss the mark. In a similar way, we talked about you developing a bit of a needs list earlier. So again, using this worksheet is the opportunity for you to list your key needs, give those needs a priority. They're mandatory, they're optional, it doesn't really matter. And again, kind of just compare one supplier against another just to see who's hitting the right marks for you. Which is really what this is saying. What are the must-haves? What are the should-haves? And what are the nice-to-haves? And these very quickly will enable you, using that need sheet, to be able to determine who moves forward through your vetting of the various systems out there. And in all of this, it is important to understand that what you're embarking on is a journey. And let me encourage you not to rush the journey. Take your time, make sound, informed decisions. When you're exploring a few different vendors, don't be afraid to go back to them and say, hey, can we have a second demo? Or can we even have a third call that I can bring my IT person or my board in on, or whatever? People that are doing the kind of work that we do, we never shy away from that. We are really keen to make sure that you make good decisions, because again, you're going to be investing not just money, but a lot of time and resources into doing this. So understand that you're on a journey, and at the end of the day, what you really want to do is find the right solution for you. So the 4 stages we're really looking at is determining who the contenders might be in the marketplace, using some of those tools I just talked about. Then move on to looking at some demonstrations. So many products these days allow you to undertake just some broad kind of online demonstrations. I know while I'm saying this, on our website, actually you can go to betterimpact.tv, and we have an Australian New Zealand version of our demonstration on that. But also Didier and I run webinar demonstrations like this periodically as well. We'll talk a bit more about that later. But have a look at the system that you're considering. Have a good look at it. See how clunky it feels. See how intuitive it feels, and get a sense of seeing it firsthand. Once you've had a look at that, again, you might immediately eliminate a couple of contenders and then move into a trial phase. And again, it might be with just the key contender, or it might be the top 2 or 3, but move into that trial, test it out, give it a good working over. And again, as a part of the trial, involve your volunteers, because it's one thing to know what it's like from the administrative point of view, but having volunteers logging in and doing things can be giving you really sound feedback as well. Trial the application process and see how that feels and how that looks and how that works. Doing this also means that you have the ability to come back to the vendor and say, look, I've been playing in the trial and I've got some really key critical questions here, because it might mean that you've just misunderstood how something is working, and that clarification can then solve that particular issue. And then ultimately, when you settle on something, you're going to want to subscribe. You'll see the timeline that we've suggested here is that this process could take you 2 to 4 months. That's pretty common. And in fact, you know, we typically, not typically, we sometimes come across organizations, you know, it might take them 12 months to get to the point that they finally subscribe to a solution. Look, this is all pretty much what we've already talked about. So stage 1, determining your contenders. So have a look at those kind of lists that we've been talking about and that we've been encouraging you to develop. Develop with your project team the kind of short list your vendors. Do your research. We have a link here, volunteersoftwarecomparisons.com, where you can go, and that will give you comparative data across different vendors, so that you can have a quick and easy snapshot and have a look and see what different vendors do, and also read reviews about the different vendors that have been left by people in the sector. And then ultimately you're going to shortlist. Again, I won't spend much time on this, but obviously as you start to work through that process, you're very quickly going to find, particularly if you're looking at your must-haves, you're going to find that some organizations just don't cut the mustard, and you're going to disqualify them very quickly and narrow down your list. Then move on to stage 2. I probably talked a bit too much about this before, but you know, undertake those demonstrations. As I said, look for online demonstrations, but also do not be afraid to reach out to people like Didier to say, hey, can we book and have a personal demonstration with you? If you undertake a demonstration and you just feel that it's not for you, don't feel like you're trapped. just say to the vendor, hey, I really appreciate your time. We don't think that's for us. We're moving on to something else. You're perfectly fine. I know for me that, you know, if I ever get to a website and I'm asked to enter my details, suddenly I feel a little bit like there's a bit of pressure on and people are going to start hassling me and all the rest of it. You are the person that is looking, and you always have the right to say, hey, we're out of here. And then the vendor can remove you from their list. So don't be afraid to jump on in and have a really good, thorough look. Again, once you've done demonstrations, you're going to shortlist a little bit more. You're going to move to trial. As I said, make sure you are very thorough in your trial. And with your trial, let me encourage you to only sign up for a trial when you know you have the time and space to do it properly. The amount of times that we have people sign up for a trial and then ours is a 30-day trial, and at the end of 30 days, they come back and say, I didn't even have a chance to log in once. Can we extend it or can we start again? And so this goes on and on and on. Whereas other people will say, yep, we definitely want to come back and do a trial. It'll be 3 months away, but we'll be back in touch. And they come back, they set the trial, they get into it, they put time aside, and they can test things out properly. So ensure that you've got the time allocated to be undertaking all of these different areas. Eventually, you're going to come to some kind of decision making with your project team. Look at a final solution, and you're going to then reach out and subscribe to that solution. So, you know, it's a little bit long-winded, but it's really about saying, don't make a quick ad hoc decision about this. It is much too important. Plan, prepare, then execute a plan to explore your volunteer management solution before you ever even start to implement it. It's really, really critical. You don't get a chance to do it. You make the wrong decision and you invest a lot of time in the wrong decision. You eventually find that you're so far down that rabbit hole that it's hard to dig yourself out. So you're much better being assured that what you choose in the first place is the right way to go. Just all those lists that I showed you before, just to reassure you, all of those things that both the volunteer management professional and the volunteers engaging with the software that we listed are all things that can occur within our volunteer impact software. So we can recruit people online. Everything is highly customizable. We have electronic learning features in the software. The background check thing here is actually not something we can offer in Australia or New Zealand, just to be clear about that. But rostering, sending texts, sending emails, communicating with volunteers, generating hours reports, outcomes reports. We have a volunteer portal where volunteers can log in. They can receive messaging from us. They can log their hours. They can log feedback. They can see where we have vacancies and sign up for that. They can undertake that e-learning. So it's very interactive, and we have a mobile app for volunteers to be able to use as well. So all of that stuff is definitely something that we can do. If nothing else, I would encourage you to consider us as being one of the products that you strongly look at. So wrapping up. So we will be sending a copy of this recording along with the buyer's guides and worksheets and other things that we've talked about in the next 24 hours so that you can look back on this and you can explore this a little bit more. And we, as I mentioned, we also have upcoming regular webinars where we look at volunteer impact in a bit more detail. So if you are in the market and you're starting to look around for a volunteer management solution and you would like to see better impact in the flesh, as I said, you can go to betterimpact.tv and watch our demo there. Or if you go to betterimpact.com.au/events or .co.nz/events, you'll see our upcoming seminars where Didier and I can actually walk you through the actual core features of our software in a bit more detail and help you to start to think about us compared with other players in the marketplace. So I'm now, with all of having said that, going to be quiet and see if there are any questions that you have. Feel free to pop your hand up and ask or pop it in the chat, and Didier can convey that to me. But happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
I was just trying to find the hand button, but anyway, shall I go ahead?
Fire away, Kate.
We're just very much starting a journey in terms of putting some structure around our volunteer management. We think we have around 2,500 volunteers across the country, and we have in places we have very good local systems, and others we suspect not so good. But we have nothing that's across the whole country, so we're kind of starting from scratch. I guess our challenge going forward will be that, like you mentioned before, that we have quite solid existing systems, including Snap Hire. We've just implemented recently for recruitment, and so there's an expectation that we would use our existing tools for at least part of the volunteer process.
Yep.
So that presents a lot of challenges. So sorry, that's the background. One, you did also touch on and mention that there's a comment that technology is hard for volunteers to use, and that's something that we hear a lot. But that I suspect that's got a lot to do with the requirement, the tools that we that are asking them to use, and how difficult those are. But it's obviously you've got the phone app, so I'm really interested in that. And do you have any data or information about the percentage of volunteers who use the phone app as opposed to a laptop or that kind of thing?
Look, I couldn't off the top of my head tell you what the percentages might be, but certainly we have a lot of organisations who have their volunteers using the app now, and the app is really great because it actually enables volunteers to simply log in and log off when they start and end a shift. Just by opening the app, it says, "What are you doing today?" "I'm driving." A click, bang, they're done. They've got information from you. They log off and they leave. It's as simple as that. And what we find, and even if they're not using the app, even if, for example, a lot of our organisations who have volunteers who arrive and leave from a single location, they'll set up a time clock, like a tablet or something, that volunteers can scan, log in and out. But we've even got it at the point now where you can give a volunteer a QR code, and they can scan the QR code when they arrive and scan the QR code when they leave. So you can make it as simple as that. And what we find, and like I said, I've been doing this for 15 years with Better Impact now, and I've had some really large charities around the country say, "Yep, this is really great, but we're not introducing this to our volunteers. This is way too scary for them. They're never going to adopt to this." And they put it off for years and years and years and years and years. And eventually they get to the point they say, "Well, okay, can't put it off any longer. We've got to do it." So they do it, and categorically they've all come back and they've all said, "I don't know why we didn't implement this with our older volunteers early," because they all took to it like ducks to water. As long as you have a really coherent plan and you understand that some people are going to struggle with it, just present it in that way. Okay, we're going to have a team meeting. We're going to run through this again. Here's how it works. And then if there's some people that are absolutely just going to dig their heels in and say, "No, bugger you, I'm not doing this," then you just say, "Okay, well, let's work a different way for you, but let's move on with everybody else." We've seen really good examples where organizations recruit like a cyber deputy. They have a volunteer who actually sits near the login screen and works with people for the first month that might be having difficulty. And once they've done it a couple of, one of my favorite photos of all time is an 85-year-old woman at Sovereign Hill in Ballarat, dressed in full period garb. So Sovereign Hill's a historic museum, and she's dressed in full period garb, about to go out into the museum for the day. And this was the day that Kelly, the volunteer manager, said, for the very first time, she said, Marg, she said, today I'm going to get you to all log in on an iPad for the first time. And Marg didn't say, I can't do that. I don't know what my username is. I don't know what. Her only comment was, what's an iPad, dear? And that was the technology. It wasn't like I can't pop some credentials in. It's I don't know what an iPad is. So, you know, with the right hand holding and training and support, it's very, very doable. And like I said, we've developed the QR codes and the express time clock to make it as easy as possible for people that might be a little tech resistant or challenged. Didier, you have a comment or a question from somebody?
Yeah, just got a couple. So one from Tracy just says, what are the costs for a variety of different software packages? Example, 50 to 100 volunteers.
Yep. So the best way to get an idea of pricing, let me share my screen again for you all. If I can, there we go. If you come to our website, the .com.au or the .co.nz, we have a pricing page on that website. And there are a couple of different ways you can generate calculators in here. So we actually have a little calculator right here in the top corner. So if we were looking at a single database account, standard edition we call that, with up to 50 volunteers, $360 Australian a year. That's on the Australian site. Further down this page, there is also a link to where you can generate a more formal quote for yourself and have that emailed to yourself as a PDF. And that quote document not only includes the numbers, it can also include kind of set up services and training services and things like that as well. Did you have another question, Didier, before I go to Kate and Jadine?
Yep, one more. Alison just asked, can she pass on the recording and the worksheets to others searching for a VMS at the moment?
Absolutely, 100%. Yep. Jadine, let's go with you.
Kia ora. Just a quick question in relation to some organisations that have annual volunteer events, and that's it, and whether there are software solutions that enable them to have that software for a 1 month out of the entire year space. We often get asked that question. So is there anything out there that fits the bill?
So it is a really good question, and we work with a lot of organisations who have a kind of a once a year event, including a whole bunch in New Zealand. The short answer is we have an annual subscription, and the annual subscription is based on the total number of active volunteers. So often what we find is that there's two elements to this. One element for me, if I put my volunteer manager's hat on, is that I think the biggest challenge for events is not the 1 week that I'm running the event. It's the other 11 months and 3 weeks of the year when the event is not running. How do I continue to keep that team engaged so that when the event comes around and I start recruiting the following year, they're already on board? So that's one advantage of having a database that you can use for the entire year. But having said that, just to get back to your question, the way that our billing works is we bill based on the number of volunteers who have the status of accepted or short or long-term inactive. Now, inactive doesn't mean they're not in the database. It just means that they're kind of parked to one side. So often what we find is that events like that, they will, after an event, they'll kind of park all their volunteers as being in process, maybe ready for the following year, so that when the annual billing comes around, it is at a reduced rate, and then they will just reactivate the people back to accepted for the duration of the event as they lead up to that. So that it, you know, particularly if it's a big event, they're not necessarily paying full tote odds for thousands of people. They'd be paying a much lower annual subscription, but they still have access to the software for the whole year. But it is an annual subscription.
Right, thank you.
Kate.
We are quite interested in impact management. We've put quite a bit of effort into tracking that for our social services and volunteers we want to add our volunteer impact to that. And so over and above number of volunteers and number of hours, do you have any capacity to track impact?
Absolutely. Yep. So we have a feature called feedback fields. And the way that feedback fields work is that when a volunteer is logging off at the end of a shift, you can ask them any questions at all that you want to learn about what happened on that shift. So it could be, how many trees did you plant today? Or it could be, how would you rate the well-being of the client that you visited on a scale of 1 to 5? Or it could be, if there was an incident today, please report it here. But all of those feedback fields are very job specific. So if I'm driving, it will say how many kilometers, how many passengers. If I'm visiting somebody, it might be a different set of questions. But all of that feedback becomes reportable. So our CEO, Tony, is really, really big on impact. In fact, he does a whole bunch of training around impact. And our belief is that, volunteering is about a whole lot more than just hours. It is about the impact that people make. And so absolutely, feedback fields is definitely the way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And they are completely built based on the needs that you need to report on. Paula.
Kia ora, guys. I've just got part of our organisation's strategic priorities within volunteering services is to grow specific areas of our work stream. For example, migrant communities, the youth. So we're looking at building those particular areas. Is there a way that we can, I guess, have the software customized so that we're able to pull reporting out of the system that reflects any sort of growth that we want to build within those particular work streams?
So yes and no. So 90% of the database is 100% built based on your needs. So it really always comes back to beginning with the end in mind. So if you know the kind of things that you want to be able to pull reports out based on at the end of the day, it's really just a matter of making sure that you built that in. Now, this might be a longer conversation, but let's just say, for example, that you were doing something around, people from different cultural backgrounds or something like that. So, if you had the custom fields built in that then got populated, because you're capturing that in the database, you can definitely report on it. So we can't build bespoke reports just for you, but you can do that yourself. So we have a series of kind of pre-built reports based on hours and rosters and those feedback fields. But because we work with social services and animal shelters and large national organizations and local motor mechanic clubs, the only kind of standard reports we can build in are the ones that that are common across all those different kind of organizations. But you're able to pull what we call raw data reports out of the software. And raw data reports is you pulling your own data out, and then you're able to manipulate that right within the database and even create graphs and charts and other things as well. So yeah, to a degree, you can absolutely do that.
Lovely, thanks.
Cool. Didier.
Yep, got one from Patria. She says, when you said costs for 10 admins, are these people within our organization who run the system?
Yep. So just to be really clear, we do not charge additionally for administrators. So with Better Impact, your annual subscription, so on the screen here, $360 for up to 50 people, that you can have 50 volunteers and 50 administrators. Is not going to cost you a cent extra. The point I was making is that when you're looking at, if you're looking at a range of different VMS solutions, some of our competitors will charge you per administrator. So it is worth just noting that, because it's one of those things that sometimes gets overlooked. I knew there were going to be some questions. Yes, Jadine.
Kia ora. The only other thing that I would add is don't underestimate the cost and time required if you've got a current system and the need for decommissioning and the change management to transfer from current to future state.
Yep.
Always underestimated in these spaces. So, kia ora.
No, absolutely. That is really great advice. And in fact, I was working with a brand new client this morning, and they purchased our software 3 months ago, and they've been treading water for 3 months. I finally had a first call with her today, and she said it was no point me trying to do it 3 months ago because I was so busily embedded in a whole bunch of other things. She said, I've now put aside a single day a week to work on this for the next couple of months. And a big part of her conversation was, it's not just implementing the new thing, it is bringing people out of the old systems that they've been using that is going to be just as busy. So absolutely, it's sound advice that you give. Thank you. Charlene.
Sorry, I was on mute. If I've got a list of requirements, can I send them through so you can mark off what your system meets, or is it better to get a demo?
Look, I would recommend a little bit of both. If it's not an extensive list, like if you've got a dozen things you really need it to do, flick it through to Didier. He can give you a quick reply, and you can then determine whether it's worth you doing the demo. Particularly if there's some of those deal breakers. If it's a much more comprehensive list than that, then sometimes it's better to do the demo and just tick things off as you go, and then ask some questions at the end of the demo if there's some things that are unresolved. But certainly if you've got a list of really critical things and you just want to be able to quickly eliminate, us and others, and leave the ones that you should consider on the table, then by all means flick us through a list and we can have a quick look at that.
The list is quite long. It's about 50 or 60, so maybe the demo would be better.
Yeah, demo might be better.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Davina.
Kia ora. You mentioned e-learning, so can you talk to us about what that includes and how customizable it is?
Sure. So our e-learning was developed based on feedback that we received from clients who said, we can't necessarily afford the big end of LMS town, but we really want something that we can build into the software and use for our volunteers. So essentially the way that it works is in a volunteer record, there are a few different fields. One of those fields is called a qualification. And so when you develop an e-learning module in our software and a volunteer successfully completes the e-learning, it will automatically update the qualification to let you know that they have completed the e-learning. And if it's something they have to do annually, it can even put a new expiry date on it. The way that it works is that, in a nutshell, you provide content to the volunteer, and then the volunteer you will ask the volunteer a series of multiple choice questions and answers that prove that they have absorbed the content. So the content can be text, it could be a PDF document, it can be images, it can be a link to a video, it can be a link to a PowerPoint presentation. So essentially a volunteer will either open a link in their profile, or you would generate a link and email it to them, for example. They'll click on that, they'll log in, they will see the content, they'll answer the questions. When they hit submit and pass it, you determine what the pass rate is, it will then automatically update that qualification field for them. So it's pretty simplistic, but it works beautifully. And increasingly what we're also finding is that people are using that tool to have people agree to simple things like confidentiality statements and photo agreements and things. So that would be, here's the photo agreement, then there's one question with one answer. I have read, understood and agreed to the photo agreement, tick, boom, it updates the qualification. You have evidence the volunteer has now agreed to that. And we also have a badges system. So when those qualifications get updated, a badge can also show to volunteers on their page to let them know that they have now completed the hand hygiene training or whatever that might be as well. But definitely sit in on one of our demos, like sign up for one of those. We'll have a bit more of a look at e-learning and show you that as a part of that. All right, I know we're getting up tight to the end of our time. We can probably take one more question if there is one. And if there's not, I can cut you all loose. So let me again just say thank you on behalf of Didier and myself. I did have up Didier's email address. I'll just read that out to you. It is Didier, D-I-D-I-E-R, Didier at betterimpact.com.au is probably the easiest one to give to you. So feel free to reach out to Didier if you've got any other follow-up questions to this. As I said, we will flick an email out in the next 24 to 48 hours that will have the recording and the other tools. That will also have contact details in it as well. But good luck on your journey to find a good solution. And we are more than happy to be a part of that journey and to answer any questions that you might have along the way. Thanks for joining us, everybody. See ya.